Hi, everybody. Great to be with you today. Just a big bow of gratitude to the team at OpenSesame for inviting my colleague, Dr. Joanna Hong, and myself today. We're very excited to be here to explore what I think is a very timely and juicy topic, which is human potential in the age of AI. Again, just want to acknowledge something that Lisa had said at the very beginning. You know, we're holding this event during Native American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, a time to honor communities whose wisdom and ways of knowing long predate any technology that we're here to talk about today. And so just a quick note about accessibility as well. What I'm going to try and do throughout the presentation is to describe each slide out loud and read the responses in the chat throughout so that everybody can fully participate. I'm really excited today to be joined by my beloved colleague, Dr. Joanna Hong, who is a senior scientist at Humin. Joanna has a genuinely rare background because she sits at the intersection of two worlds, the science of human aging and well-being and AI. She has a PhD in psychology. She's trained with leading research institutions, including Harvard's Human Flourishing Program, and has been a subject matter expert for organizations like AARP and IDEO. She has also served as a COO at a generative AI company, which means that she has studied what makes humans flourish and has also watched AI get built from the inside. So, Joanna, welcome. So happy to be having this conversation with you today.
Thanks, Stephanie, for this amazing introduction. I'm really happy to be here today and excited for this conversation. I've been reading the chat to see where everyone's coming from. Really excited to further talk about the topics later today at the end of this presentation too.
Great, wonderful. So before we dive into the conversation with Joanna, I wanted to engage you all in the audience with a prompt that I'd love to invite you to respond to in the chat. And I just invite you to think about what qualities come to mind that make us uniquely human and distinct from AI. What qualities come to mind that make us uniquely human and distinct from AI? So just share whatever is at top of your mind. Oh, empathy got 3 right out of the gate. Okay. Emotions, feelings. Empathy. Wow, empathy is like running the game here, right? Curiosity, creativity, connection. Yeah, wonderful. So I'm seeing themes about empathy, emotions, creativity, yeah, and curiosity and relationships. Thank you so much for bringing up that piece about social connection and relationships. This is definitely going to be one of the things that we talk about today. So, okay, Joanna, this feels like exactly where we should begin. So, how do you think about these human qualities in the age of AI?
So looking at what people are sharing in the chat, this really is not just a list about efficiency or output. It really points to human qualities that shape how we judge, relate, and really make sense of what matters. And these come from our lived experiences. So that is where I want to start today, not with every possible difference between humans and AI, but with a few human capacities that feel especially important right now as AI becomes more capable.
And that feels like a really important distinction, not trying to define everything that makes us human, but on focusing on the capacities that we need to protect and strengthen at work.
Exactly. Some of these capacities often got grouped under the label of soft skills, but that label undersells them. A recent global jobs report shows that human relational skills, such as empathy and social connection, are part of the future of work conversations alongside technical skills. And in organizations, their values show up in really concrete ways in whether trust holds between teammates, whether people grow, and whether someone takes ownership when things go wrong. And these are not just outcomes, and these are not outcomes technology can create on its own.
Yes, and that raises another important question. As AI becomes more capable, might some human capacities matter even more?
So, as AI takes on more of what is technical or repeatable, human capacities like judgment, trust, and care don't become less relevant. They become more central to what remains. So, today won't be a conversation about whether technology matters. I think we all know now that it does, and it does have some positive benefits. But it is going to be a conversation about what human capacities may matter even more as the technology gets better.
Thank you for that because I think it's worth naming that this conversation lands at a hard and confusing moment for a lot of people. With how quickly AI is developing and being implemented, many people feel like their role, identity, and parts of the work that they have spent years developing are becoming obsolete. And if you're one of the people in the audience that feels that way, I can definitely relate to that as a fellow learning and development professional.
And I definitely agree that that feeling is real and it is worth naming. When change moves this fast, it can start to feel as if decisions about your work are being made around you rather than with you. And when that happens, it becomes harder to protect the capacities that keep work human. And I've seen this from inside too. Decisions about what to automate, what to build, what to phase out can happen fast, and it starts to feel inevitable. But what I want to say is that they are not. There is still a window of time here. We still have choices about what we protect, what we hand off, and what we keep as human.
And everyone that's attending this webinar right now may be feeling some additional tension. You know, you're all here because you came to your jobs because you deeply care about people, about helping others grow and develop. And you're being asked to adopt tools that may feel like they're doing the exact opposite of what you have come to do, replacing or even hurting the human work that you came here for. And there's just like a particular kind of tension there within that.
There is. And here's what I want to say: the qualities that brought you into this work, your ability to connect with people, to notice what's actually going on for them, to act with care, to know when something isn't right, those aren't becoming irrelevant. They're becoming more necessary. And the organizations that actually understand this and invest in those capacities won't just survive the age of AI. Those organizations that understand this and invest will be the ones with the advantage AI alone can't create. So I want to get specific into what I mean by these qualities. Because if you want to stay human as AI takes on more, we need to know exactly what we're protecting. And that's where I want to spend the rest of our time today.
Wonderful. So let's dive in. So on this slide, what you're going to see are five different differentiators that we used to think about as soft skills. And so they are social connection, awareness, empathy, compassion, and ethical judgment. So, Joanna, let's go ahead and start with social connection because that seems particularly foundational here. And I thought it was interesting. It also came up in the chat at the very beginning. So, why is this so important?
Because connection is part of the relational fabric of an organization, and organizations depend on information people often don't share unless they feel connected. What is unclear, what is not working, who needs help, where risk is building. So, without that information, organizations can make worse decisions with greater confidence. And connection is often one of the first casualties of AI at work, even when organizations do not notice it right away. And in the age of AI, connection matters more and not less. Because AI handles more of the routine layer of work, the relational thread that used to ride along with that work doesn't anymore. So it has to be protected on purpose. Even before the age of AI, the US Surgeon General was calling on workplaces to make social connection a strategic priority. And I think that's only become more urgent.
So, how is AI changing that?
Yeah, and here's a part that's really easy to miss. AI can simulate the surface of a connection, but that simulation isn't same as building a relationship. It can only appear as one. For example, a teammate sends an email that's AI drafted, a manager reads an AI summarized pulse survey, a one-on-one becomes a quick Slack message written by AI. Each looks efficient, but each removes a chance to hear a tone, a hesitation, a context, the small signals that really tell you what's going on in an organization, in a team, in a relationship. So without them, problems hide longer and risks compound before anyone can name them. So here is one line that I want to share with everyone. Use AI to handle the volume, but not relationships. And inside your team, protect at least one real, unmediated conversation per week between every manager, every director report, direct report. And on outside the team, keep the human contact and keep the human touch with the people you actually serve. AI can scale the transaction, but it can't build the relationships.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, connection is critical to performance and well being, and it's not just culture work. And I think a lot of people in the audience here have felt that, but haven't had language for it. So thank you so much for that. And I love the suggestion for one unmediated conversation per week. So let's go on to the next one, which is self-awareness. Awareness is one of those terms that we hear a lot, but maybe have difficulty defining it. So what does self-awareness mean, and how does this look in practice?
So, self awareness is a capacity to notice your thoughts and emotions in real time. So, to know what you're actually thinking and feeling while it's happening, so you can respond instead of running on autopilot. So, this is uniquely a human capacity, and it puts you in the driver's seat of your own mind. AI doesn't have this, not in any meaningful sense. And in the age of AI, self awareness is harder to hold. So much of what shapes your thinking now comes from outside of your own head. Recommendations, summaries, polished suggestions ready before you've even thought about your thoughts. And they come in such big volumes too. Especially scary because research shows that when external noise sounds confident and clean, it's really easy for people to mistake it for your own thought.
So, how do you stay in contact with your own thinking when so much of it is being shaped by AI?
So, self awareness skill is something that helps you hold that line. You can read AI's output without absorbing its framing, and you can notice your own thinking before the tool fills the space. So, one small thing that you can do is before an important conversation or decision, take 1 or 2 minutes and ask yourself, what's my read here first? What not what the tool is suggesting, not what the room is leaning towards, but your own read and get exposed to all the other external information.
I love that so much. Thank you. So it's really like using one's own discernment. So self awareness is really about staying in contact with your own thinking and feeling and not getting swept along by everything around it. Wonderful. Love that. So the next one on the list came up a lot in that initial chat, which is empathy. And this word also gets used a lot. Can you talk a little bit about empathy in the work context?
So empathy, and I was just so happy to see that so many people typed this in the chat earlier, is the capacity to understand what someone is actually going through, their feelings, their pressures, what the situation is really like for them on the inside. So AI can detect sentiment patterns, but it can't understand what something actually feels like. So, for example, a manager with empathy can see what their team is actually carrying, the workload, the worries, the context behind what shows up in a meeting. An L&D professional with empathy can see what learners are really struggling with, not just what shows up in a survey. And in the age of AI, the temptation to let AI's read of what people stand in for, it's the temptation is to let AI read of people stand in front of your own. So sentiment scores, AI summarized notes, dashboards that label what your team is feeling. Those can be useful inputs, but they're not understanding. So AI pattern matches on text, but it can't sit with what someone is actually going through. And people can usually tell when they've been categorized rather than understood.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to something really important here, which is really capturing the feeling and the emotion, which is distinctly human. So, how do you actually practice empathy at work?
So, empathy helps you move past that quick read. AI can give you signals, but empathy really helps you to ask the question of what someone is actually going through. So maybe in your next one on one, spend the first 5 minutes on what's actually going on for the person before you jump into the work.
Yeah, I think that personal connection is so important. And I think it's also another thing to consider about empathy is just that ability to reflect back what you are hearing someone say, that emotion that's happening beyond the words. Because when we do this, of course, it helps, folks feel seen and understood. And this is a capacity that can also be strengthened through deep listening. So, next we have compassion, and this is often mistakenly used synonymously with empathy. So, how are compassion and empathy different?
Before I jump into explaining what compassion is, I just saw a really important chat content, and someone just wrote that AI can fake empathy, and that is true. That is happening. It's a pattern that we've trained AI to do with our own verbal language. But what research is really finding is that the empathy that is being provided by AI is actually can be detrimental to humans' well-being. That there may be more costs to AI's empathy than benefits, and that there is definitely a distinct difference between the empathy that a human provides and an AI provides. So I think this is a really important point that AI can simulate empathy, but there is a very big difference between the empathy that humans provide and what AI provides. So thank you so much again for sharing that thought in the chat. So now going back to what compassion is. So empathy is feeling what someone is feeling. Now compassion is the motivation to do something about it. So a manager who understands someone is struggling but doesn't change anything, that's empathy without compassion. Compassion is when you adjust the workload, have the hard conversation, make space. It's the move from feeling to acting. So, one temptation of automation is that work becomes more frictionless but less humane. Compassion interrupts that drifts and says, just because something can be handled faster doesn't mean the human impact disappears. So, here is one thing that you might want to do. When someone on your team is visibly overwhelmed, don't send them a resource, have the conversation. Compassion requires a real presence, and AI can't substitute for it.
Yes, thank you for that. And what I think is really striking about compassion, just to pull out this main point, is that it requires or asks of you to do something, not just to feel it. And I think compassion is also really central to helping us shift from sometimes what can feel like empathic overwhelm or distress when you might have a team member or even, teams within your organization that are deeply struggling. So it really, compassion calls on us to tap into that motivation to do something to help when we are able to. So let's go on to the last one, which is ethical judgment. You said earlier in our conversation that this one feels particularly urgent.
Yeah, it is. Ethical judgment is the capacity to know what's right when the answer isn't obvious, when the recommendation looks clean, but something about it isn't fair, and when it's technically possible, but someone gets hurt. So, ethical judgment is especially vulnerable under speed, pressure, and conformity, everything that we are feeling in the current moment. And AI can really intensify all three of these things. So the risk is not just faster output, it is losing the pause where someone asks, should we actually do this? So I would say in your organization, make it safe to pause and don't make it just something that is allowed. Make it something that is expected. In high stakes decisions, someone should be responsible for asking the uncomfortable question.
And just to highlight the importance of that pause, within that pause, there is space for us to tune into our own intuition, your inner wisdom that points you in the right direction of what to do. Because without that pause, it's difficult to do that because of the sheer speed within which we are moving. So, Joanna, these are such powerful qualities, but honestly, in the pace of how many of us are operating organizationally right now, how do people often show up with these qualities at the forefront?
Honestly, not as often as we'd like. And um, we And I personally have to admit that sometimes I let some of these capacities fade. And that's not a personal feeling. I really think that it is what happens under pressure and speed. But here is the turn. And this is a part I want you to really think about and maybe take with you today. So, Dr. Richard Davison, a pioneer in neuroscience, has spent decades showing that these human characteristics that we talked about earlier are not fixed. The brain changes with practice, and like any other skills, they strengthen with practice. So there are two questions. The first is whether you're willing to continue to build on them, and whether your organization is investing in them to allow people to make the choice of further strengthening their skills. And I think these are really important questions because, again, I saw in the chat earlier someone pointing out that organizations and leadership sometimes don't leave room for people to focus on these skills that may be really important. So I think there are two levels in the organizations where this can be strengthened at the individual level and at the higher organizational level. Which now brings us to our next question. If these capacities matter more now and are trainable, what should we keep in human hands?
All right, so let's move into the five capacities that we must keep in human hands. So, what you'll see on the slide here is difficult feedback, relationship repair, moral judgment, owning the outcome, and mentoring. So, Joanna, why these five?
Because these are moments when humans become more human, difficult feedback, relationship repair, owning the outcomes, and there's plenty of work that AI handles well, and these are not those things. If a machine handles every difficult conversation, no one ever learns how to have one. And none of the unique characteristics grow by watching. They grow through practice, through friction, through doing them imperfectly and learning.
And what about the moments that aren't clearly one or the other, whether where you're not sure whether AI should help or not?
When you feel that hesitation, I think that's also information. So I would say don't push past it. It usually means the moment is asking something more of you than a tool can give. So I would ask four quick questions. First is, does this need me to understand someone? So going back to this very human, unique skill to be able to understand what someone is feeling on the inside. Second, does this need me to own my outcome? Not only getting something done, but also owning up to the consequences of how that work led to some of the results. Third, does this need real expertise and not just polished language made by AI? And finally, is this a skill that I'm willing to give away? If yes to any of them, stay in it. There's a concept in behavioral science called sense of agency that felt sense that you are the author of of your own decisions, and research links it to various positive outcomes. But you hand off too many judgment calls, and that sense quietly erodes away under the surface, not all at once, but over time, until one day you look up and realize you don't quite trust your own thinking anymore. And there's actually this story that I keep coming back to. There's so many scary stories about AI and how it has could negatively impact our well-being in our world recently. And I read about this a while ago, but I really just can't get this out of my head. So there was a well-known developer who started using AI to build apps faster and faster. Again, this person was well recognized, built several startups that many of you may have heard of. And so he started using different AI tools, created all the agents that everyone is all about building these days until things got too complex and complex enough that he had to step in himself. And when that moment came, he realized that he couldn't and he was just frozen. But
Oh.
what's really funny and interesting here is that until that moment, nothing had looked wrong to him. He didn't realize what was happening. He didn't feel like anything was changing until that moment hit. And he realized that without him knowing, his sense of agency, his sense of confidence has been quietly eroding away. And that is the kind of drift worth protecting against on purpose.
Yeah, what strikes me about that story is kind of like gradually, then suddenly, right? It's like it slowly starts creeping up on you, and then all of a sudden you realize you've lost your capacity that you really need to interact in those moments. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And so, what about for the learning and development folks in the room? Like, what does this mean for the work that they do or that we do, since I'm one of the learning and development professionals in the room?
And I think it is to be clear about what your job really is. It's understanding what people need to learn, designing the conditions where changes become possible, and being present when someone shifts in confidence, insight, behavior, or belief. And that work doesn't go away with AI, it becomes even sharper focus.
Yeah, so we can use AI for what it's good at and intentionally protect the skills we want to keep. And this is the mantra that I keep reciting in my own mind: protect the skills I want to keep. And I could even say, and further strengthen and practice the skills that I also want to keep. Because I think the important thing that you've been talking about throughout here is how these human capacities are within us and they can be strengthened through practice and through training. Okay, so we've talked about now at this point what to protect. The harder question is what this requires of the people doing the protecting. So we're going to move on to the next slide here. So we've got three things on this slide. Build what you most want to keep. Make space for human judgment. Protect the moments AI makes too easy to skip. And train the capacities that AI can't replicate. So, Joanna, walk us through these.
So all three are very foundational. AI changes what each one requires. So let's start with the human judgment. When AI makes it easier to move fast, judgment needs room to operate. People need to be able to pause, ask questions, and push back. Um, Google's Project Aristotle found that psychological safety was the strongest factor in team effectiveness. And without it, AI can just speed up bad decisions. And safety really depends on how leaders respond when someone actually speaks up to something uncomfortable.
Yeah, not speaking up part really matters, doesn't it? So, what about the second?
So the second is about development. AI can help people move faster, but it removes too many of the moments where people have to struggle, decide, and respond. And it can also reduce how people grow. Some capacities only develop by being used, and judgment is one of them. Difficult conversation is one of them. So, part of leading well right now for your organization is knowing which moments still need to stay with the person, even though it may mean a slowed down efficiency.
And the third one, then train the capacities AI can't replicate.
This last one starts with being honest about what you want your people to still be good at as AI takes on more of the routine work. If you want judgment, you need to teach judgment. If you want trust, you need to teach connection. If you want culture with more than speed and polish, you do need to teach these skills. I think one of the mistakes that we can easily make is treating these values as something we admire instead of concrete capacities you build in an organization. So, again, social connection, self awareness, empathy, compassion, ethical judgment, these are not abstract ideals. They show up in behavior and they can be practiced. And AI cannot build them for people in your organizations. That is the human work. And I think that's why L&D's most valuable work was never the content production, it was human development.
I want to actually just sit with that for a moment. L&D's most valuable work was never content production, it was human development. And that matters a lot right now because content is becoming something that everybody can suddenly produce. And it's also becoming a lot of people's jobs that maybe they weren't trained for. And people are feeling pressured to wear these five hats that they don't have the experience or they've never been trained to do. But you signed up for human development, right? Y'all, like that's the work. So, wonderful. Thank you so much for all of that, Joanna. So, I want to just engage you all in the audience again. What is one human capacity you would like to protect or develop more deliberately? So, maybe it's like one of the things that we've talked about today, maybe it's something else, but would just love to hear from you. What's one human capacity you want to protect? Human judgment and decision making, ethics, compassion and decision making, connection and compassion, psychological safety. Wonderful. Courage. Wow. Compassion, judgment, decision making, whimsy. I love all of these. I'm very inspired. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so Joanna, we've got one last question here, right? Would you like to take us through this? What
So,
kind of leader, colleague, and organization do you want to build? Yeah.
yes. And that question I think really matters because those choices are already being made either on purpose or by default. Social connection, self-awareness, empathy, compassion, ethical judgments, these are not fixed traits. They can be built, they can be strengthened, and they can be practiced. And I think that is a real choice in front of us. AI is already here, but the question is whether you're shaping that integration intentionally or letting it shape you or your organization.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for sharing all of this wisdom based on your scientific background and your unique experience building AI from the ground up. And just want to thank all of you in the audience for being here. So, with that said, we are here to answer questions, engage in a further dialogue. So, I'll invite Lisa back on here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you can see the hearts, the emojis. We are so excited about this session right here. I know I was taking notes. I was also thinking about specific situations that are happening right now in the flow of work, right? We had a session previously where we talked about AI in the wild, and I felt like this session was putting me in the place of what's actually happening right now in different projects, in different meetings, and how am I showing up? How is our team showing up? How are we making decisions? And I feel like what you shared sort of centers on where we need to be as humans, right? We have to capitalize on our strengths that AI cannot replicate. So y'all, with all of that, I definitely want to make sure that you get some amazing information from the team at Humin. We do have some resources that are available for you. As you are grabbing that information from the chat, I definitely want to make sure that you know that we have a resources tab, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. You should be able to see a resources tab that has some information for you. There is going to be a link in there to a report. So first, I'm going to drop the link to that report itself so that you can access it. We do have our team at Humin who are here right now supporting us as well. And so we want to thank you all so much for being here. But just know that one of our strongest partners, which is Humin right now in terms of your human potential being capitalized at work, they have created resources to help you practice. I heard that word a lot. I heard that phrase mentioned a lot, which is you have to practice what you want. You have to teach what you want, right? And so the way you do that is you practice, right? It's like going to the gym. You lose those muscles if you don't keep going, right? So please use those muscles. Please use the resources from Humin to do that. And before we go into Q&A, I also want to give you access to our HRCI codes and your SHRM and ATD codes. We do have access to these resources in the chat for you. So please make note of those if you are here for those codes so that you can be able to get your recertification. And now let's jump straight into the Q&A. As we're going through the Q&A, if you have any questions for our speakers today, please put them in the Q&A section. We will try to answer all the questions that are coming through. But if we find them in the chat, we'll grab them as well. I did note a few of them, but please put them in the Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first question is from an anonymous user. What happens when these decisions are not made by you? So I think, Dr. Han, this question actually came through when you were talking about making judgment, when you had that one slide, a beautiful slide that talked about what skills do we keep, right? So tell us a little bit about what do we do, right? How do we move? And I'm thinking maybe from this question, it's about leadership, right? Maybe leadership is making the decisions and maybe they're using AI. What do we do?
I definitely can relate to this question. With the speed of how things are developing, we don't always get the space to be able to practice and strengthen. But I think there is something that you can do at an individual level within your relationships, individual relationships with your teamwork. So it doesn't have to be a leader in your team putting in a new agenda for the entire team. It could be you walking up to your colleague after lunch and just trying to show a sense of empathy, compassion, have a conversation that may be a little bit hard, but that can actually help your teammate support them in the work that they're doing. So I think starting out small with things that are actually under control would be the first step.
And I want to add just something here too that is coming immediately to my mind, which is just to get curious. I go back to at the very beginning of the chat, someone had mentioned the capacity to be curious, and we do as human beings have the capacity to get curious. So you could just reflect on, first of all, with self-awareness, like what's my own internal response to feeling like I don't have agency here? Then you can actually ask yourself a reflection question. Where do I have agency? Do I have agency over anything within this? Often where we do have the most agency and the only agency is over our own emotional reactivity and responsiveness. So like the more that we get frustrated and to get collapsed into the overwhelm of feeling like we don't have control, the more we lose capacity to be resilient and responsive from a place of calm resilience. So I think the encouragement is get curious, reflect on where you have agency, try and maintain your own emotional balance, and to try and act skillfully in whatever ways you can. You do have those capacities. There are things that are in your circle of influence, and it's just remembering what those things are. So, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you so much for adding that, because I've sort of sensed in a little bit of a way that part of our role here as humans, right? I think you said this, Stephanie, so well, which is most of us here are probably learning and development professionals, right? In some capacity, right? And the goal was human development, right? It was about making sure that the humans are doing well at work. And with AI, we can run the risk of relegating a lot of that work to AI because, oh, it's more efficient, we can be more productive, da da da. But we're forgetting that the humans are the power in the workplace. You have to protect your assets and how they think. We can't all just be in this echo chamber of what AI's decisions are. So I really like that answer that both of you actually gave. And that actually leads us to our next question, which actually just came through from Erica. And I apologize, Erica, if I say your last name incorrectly. Bune, maybe I said it correctly. Tell me in the chat. Erica asks a really good question about what new roles and capabilities might be necessary to foster these capacities. And I'm just thinking, Stephanie, you're in L&D, right? You're in there doing all of this work, right? What new roles do you think are needed, maybe even at Humin?
That's a very interesting question because what comes to my mind isn't necessarily adding a new role, although I'm sure there would be a place for that. And maybe Joanna has more insight into that response. But what I think it has to do more with, honestly, is setting the intention to strengthen these capabilities in oneself. And so, without even awareness of what these capacities are that we're trying to develop, of course, we can't build anything. It's like realizing that you might, want to build muscles at the gym, but not knowing that the gym exists, right? So it's like so now we have awareness that these capacities can be developed. So it's like finding the tools or the resources to help us strengthen these capacities. And, one of the things that I think is really unique about our work at Humin is that we have this framework of well-being that consists of 4 very distinct human kind of areas that can be strengthened through mental training, which are awareness, social connection, insight, which are skills of curiosity and purpose. So I think it actually starts with oneself, honestly, and strengthening these capacities, because what will happen is when we strengthen these capacities within ourselves, it automatically has an influence over how we're interacting in the workplace and in our relationships, in turn having a positive impact organizationally and even beyond. So I think it actually just starts with oneself, honestly, and setting the intention to strengthen. But I don't know, Joanna, what comes to your mind in terms of if there are any roles that are needed?
I was actually thinking the same thing, that it might not be about adding new roles, but more about making these capacities more explicit. So this was one of the points I was making later in the presentation, is that we don't want to stop at just acknowledging that these are good qualities to have or nice to haves or something that we idealize, right? We make it very explicit that these are concrete skills that as a team, and Stephanie, as you said, as an individual, we need to strive towards. So again, I think it's more about the emphasis rather than creating new job titles.
I love that. And I was just thinking about, in the chat, there was a question from one of our participants. Somebody mentioned, and let me see if I can find it really quickly. I don't know if I can find it. I think Shannon put, I think human hands are being managed by AI, and human hearts and head are still ours. And I absolutely love that,
Mm,
because
I
when
love
you think
that.
about it, yes, we do want to, like the elephants in the room, right? AI is helping us be productive in some capacity. So let's not just ignore that, right? There is some support there. There's a lot going on. I am having a lot of fun building AI agents and waking up in the morning, and my stuff is sort of done for me and I just have to check it. I love that. So the hands is being taken care of. So I want to just kind of talk through how we are as humans, right? We have to adapt as well, right? And Becky mentioned about performance consulting, which, there's multiple models for that. And then I was just thinking about change management models and how they may be standing the test of time. And this is the true measure of whether those models are successful. What do you think about that? Have you considered how these models that organizations have used for decades are playing a role in this age of AI?
Joanna, I'll let you respond to that one.
That's a really interesting question. And I think it might be too early to say that um, either these kind of models have to change or they have to be radically revamped. But I think it just goes back to the same message of, rather than making big changes, of just recreating a whole new system, starting at the individual level, taking the smaller steps, so then eventually that impact expands across an organization. I think that may eventually lead to a new type of a model. But I do think that it may be too early to say. We definitely think the existing models are outdated and we need new ones. Stephanie, would love your thoughts on this.
No, I completely agree with you. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. I'm really taken by something someone said in the chat, actually, if you don't mind me, Lisa, like pulling
Yeah,
that out.
of course.
So Eric said, when people are already feeling the pressure of change and increased performance, it may be hard to get people to think about self-improvement. So I was wondering if coaching, for instance, might be something orgs should incorporate or train leaders to be better coaches. There are two things that are coming to mind for me personally in response to this question. So the first thing is, I think about these capacities as beyond self improvement. Like, I think that these are vital. These are vital for organizational success. I mean, not only are these qualities vital to being human, but I think that they go beyond they transcend self improvement into something that isn't a nice to have. It's actually a need to have. So that's the first thing that I want to say. But myself, as a national board certified wellness coach and leadership coach, I find coaching to be so important. And so I say yes on all the fronts. Like, I think coaches can be so helpful because coaches can reflect back an individual's strength. It can help them realize their capacity. It can help it can help them realize where they're stuck. So I think yes, all the coaching, and yes, all of the training of leaders to be better coaches. I think all of that would help. But I really do think that this is beyond self-improvement.
I do love that. I'm so glad you brought that in, because yes, I think we can sometimes think of this as, oh, it's just professional development, right? When
Yeah.
oh, it's so critical. It's actually critical to your business success. Your business will not survive without your humans. Like, that is a done deal, right? Like, you can't survive without your humans. So you have to optimize your humans' potentials. And so yeah, we can't relegate it to just saying, oh, it's just self-improvement. Use your professional development hours to do that. It's very critical to make sure that we're investing in our humans. And so my last question here is, before we run out of time, but my last question here is really about trust. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how, as leaders, we can preserve trust when we know our teams are anxious about AI. We want to continue to have people innovate, right? We don't want to be left behind, as they say, but also we want to preserve trust. Any ideas on how that can happen from a leadership perspective?
I think one of
Yeah.
the
Go
oh,
ahead, Joanna.
sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
No, you. I just talked, so you go ahead.
I really think one of the first steps for leadership is opening space for all the uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's where all the signals exist of things to improve on, things that are actually going well. And so at the leadership level, making uncomfortable conversation a norm in the organization, I really think is a priority.
And I'll just add to that, to go back to some of those capacities that we're talking about before in terms of empathy, like reflect back the fear. Yes, have that hard conversation, reflect back that you're hearing the fear. Compassion, tap into that motivation to do things that could be helpful. So, perhaps it's a training issue, like help them understand how to use AI in ways that will help their job be better and not completely take over their job. Like I feel like what's happening with AI tools is they're accessible, they're being thrown on people, and there really is not a lot of training and how to use it in the right ways. So help them understand, what do you need to protect in terms of your own skill? How can you use this in the best way possible and use AI for what it's good at? But I think like just recognizing that the fear is there first and foremost is like the most important thing.
I think what's really interesting about this shift is that usually a shift like this only happens to certain group of people in an organization, but this is a phenomenon that really every single person in an organization, including CEOs of some of the biggest organizations, are also experiencing with maybe like an employee who just started their first job yesterday. So I think recognizing that connection there, and just as Stephanie talked about, empathy, compassion, just really highlighting that is important. And the last point I want to make is that we often talk about AI conversations and these other more human conversations as two separate categories. But I truly believe that they can be combined. And even as we're speaking about AI getting trained in all these new products that just come out every day, there can be empathy, there can be connection, there can be compassion. So let's not separate them all the time, but think about really how to incorporate all the human qualities and skills at every layer of what the company is doing with AI and without AI.
Absolutely love it. Oh my gosh, y'all. That was the actual perfect ending, Dr. Han. This is not something affecting just a subset of your organization. It's not just the IT department or whatever. Every single person, even your newest hire, is being affected. Please pay attention. This conversation is critical. I want to let Shannon know, Shannon and all of y'all, you can use this fabulous content for your internal conversations. I hope you will share this link out throughout your organization. We're doing this work together for humanity. I really believe the future of work is human.